Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President of Dale Carnegie Training, Tokyo, Japan. And my special guest today is Campbell Hanley, who is the Managing Director of Weber Shandwick, Japan. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So you've been in Japan quite a while and you've had many iterations here, but how is it you came to Japan in the first place?
Right. Of course, everybody who lives in Japan gets asked that question, many times. I think that my answer is not very exciting. Well, maybe it is for people who are not Japanese, but for Japanese, they're a little bit disappointed because it really was on a whim. So I've been here since 1992. And really, after I'd finished university, I just wanted to live in a country that was non-English speaking, break out of a very, homogenous society that I grew up in. I just thought, I'm going to do a year living in a country that doesn't speak English.
Where's your hometown? Where were you living?
I was living in, I say Melbourne when I'm in Japan, but it's actually about 150 kilometres outside of Melbourne in a small town called Torquay.
Torquay.
Yeah.
Which is the home of the rich and well-appointed Melbourneites who have their summer holiday homes there, right?
That's
so
right,
it's
exactly
a very
now.
upmarket area in Melbourne.
For sure. It certainly has gone up in price since we started living there. So, so decided, okay, I've got to go live somewhere that's non-English speaking. Hopefully some place that has some relevance to Australia. So when I come back, I'll be able to kind of use that experience. And so I decided to go to China originally. And then one thing led to another, and I get all this different advice saying, oh no, it's too extreme. If you've never lived overseas before, that will be really, really tough. How about Hong Kong? Great, Hong Kong sounds wonderful. But then that was going to defeat the purpose of living in a non-English speaking environment. People said, you moved to Hong Kong, you're never going to learn Chinese. And it was still under British rule at that time. And then luckily I had some friends who had just come back from a long-term stint living in Japan. And they said it was one of the most wonderful places that they've lived. And they had kind of spent their whole lives living around Asia. And they said, it's the best place to go. So I kind of spun the globe, said, Japan, here I come.
Okay.
So that was it.
Right. So your first job was in media, I think, that's right?
Well, actually, my first job that I actually don't talk much about, and I don't have it on my LinkedIn profile, was actually in a small PR company.
Okay.
So I came here, so I was studying, got to a certain level of Japanese and thought, okay, I was ready to move back to Australia. But once I could speak a certain level of Japanese, it became very attractive to Japanese employers here. So I worked for a small PR company, did that for about 3 years. And then one of the marketing companies that we would work with headhunted me, and I did work there for 3 years. So my first 6 years really working in Japan was in communications. And then in that marketing company, I was doing a lot of digital work. So this is in the late 90s. So digital meant something very different then than it does today. But it enabled me to actually get a job with the Mainichi newspapers that was moving all digital, going away from paper, and especially the English language edition. They actually shut it down towards the end of the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. So they shut that down and got rid of like 30 or something editors. I don't know the details there, so maybe you have to check. But they really downsized just to this core team of editors and writers and translators that were moving into the digital space. So I did that. So that's when I moved into media, and I was working as a staff writer for the Mainichi Daily News. And during that time, I was freelancing for Fortune magazine and from Time magazine for what they called special projects, which was basically they were advertorials, but they had a really good policy. Something that I really liked. It was let's not get a copywriter or an ad company to prepare these advertorials. Let's get a journalist to come up with the whole story, pitch it to us, and then if it works, we'll kind of edit it here, there, but try to get the story that the client wants to actually tell from a journalistic point of view. And I really love that. And my brief experience in a PR company kind of fed into that. And I thought, this is really, really interesting. And so I started to do more of that actually at the Niche in my main job. And I thought, listen, I should make a career out of this. And towards the end of the 2000s, I moved to an advertising company, a big American advertising company that had just set up a content marketing agency within the company there. And they were producing what we call customer magazines. So
this, what year is this?
It's around the end of the 2000s. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly. Yeah. So around 2009, I think. Yeah.
So content marketing as a thing sort of appeared around about that time. It wasn't something you didn't heard the word content marketing as a compound until about that
exactly
time.
Right. Yes, it was. So it was very exciting, and to have somebody who had actually been on the media side that was very passionate about working on the dark side, as I like to say, was great. And the communications people that I was talking to with the clients were really enthusiastic to actually have somebody that was enthusiastic about really telling their story from an external perspective, and that's actually been a theme in a lot of the latter half of my career, is to try to have that editorial perspective on what our clients want to communicate. To be able to tell them, no, that's not a good story.
That's propaganda.
Yes.
Let's not go there. That won't help.
That's right.
Let's talk about some of the good things you're doing that are not propaganda, basically.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
And so after that, you're in a big agency now. This is a massive company, right?
Yeah, there's 50,000 people, I think, around the world. Yes.
Wow. Were you a producer? Were you running a team, or what was your situation at that time?
So from when I was in the advertising company, I was the managing editor. So I was in charge of the editorial production, and there was a separate business manager, but we worked very, very closely.
And did you have a team of people in your division?
Yes.
Right? Okay. How many people did you look after?
It must have been, I'm thinking now, between 6 and 8. So it was actually...
So this is really your first leadership experience.
That's exactly
ever.
Right. Exactly.
Anywhere.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It starts in Japan.
It does. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And I know some of your latter questions are going to be about comparing, Japan and working overseas. But my insight into that is always secondhand from people I've spoken to. So,
But what was that like? I mean, you've got people who are probably fairly experienced. They're working for a very big operation. How did they look at your experience? Did they think, well, this guy, how has he done, right? And he's working here, he's my boss. Should he really be my boss? He's not even Japanese. Why is he here? How did you gain the trust of that team? How did you gain credibility with that team?
Yep. So one of the things that and you've probably come across this, having a big name behind you. So what I found that whenever my boss was introducing me anywhere, it was always, he's come from the Mainichi newspapers. That's
nice.
Right. And even now,
nice.
I haven't mentioned too many names, but I naturally drop it in there, and I talk about Fortune magazine and Time magazine. You get legitimacy from there, and that only gets you in the door, and then it's on you to push it through. Certainly amongst my Japanese colleagues, the Mainichi newspaper has it's very, very powerful. It's like one of the top 3 daily newspapers in Japan. Depending on which region of Japan you come from, it's even more powerful than some of the other names. So that was always and it was such a good idea to actually join that company back back in the day.
All planned, of course.
All planned, that's right. But somebody did tell me at the time, they said, yes, you'll really notice the power of this business card. So that's how I've actually been able to use it. And then speaking Japanese is always great because it's you kind of impress upon your Japanese colleagues that you love the country and the culture enough to have invested a big part of your life to learn Japanese. So.
But running a group of editors, I'm wondering what's that like, because I guess I've written it; it's already good, and you want to change it. It must be a bit hard. Everyone's an artist here, and you're criticising their artwork. Yes. I mean, that must be a tricky group to lead.
It is, and especially if they are very good, and some of them are more experienced than you. And so it comes down to a negotiation. You come in and you're saying, I think it should be this, and sometimes we'll have some guidelines about how things need to be written. We'll have some very clear instructions from the clients about terminology to use. That's an easy one. When it comes down to I think it should be this because it looks better or it reads better, and then the writer or the editor says no, it doesn't. Then it comes down to compromise and I think you can't win every battle, and you're crazy if you try to, because you demotivate the writers from actually contributing their own ideas.
So what happens after that?
So then Weber Shandwick happens after this. So after the there was a few transitions in the agency. Did
you go and run other groups there?
I did.
Okay, yes. What were the other groups you ran there?
So after the content marketing agency was actually moved out of Japan after not actually long after I'd joined, because their biggest client decided to move all their business to London, to our London office, and they didn't need to have the production facilities in Japan. So the company said, well, would you like to try something else? And so I ended up moving into pure advertising sales for their international clients. And then one thing led to another, and I got much more into the digital advertising side of it. And towards the end of my time there, I was the country business director for 2 or 3 of their brands. It was also a multinational company that didn't have offices in Japan. So whenever they needed to work in Japan, they had a point person, and that was me for, as I said, 2 or 3 of these brands. So I learned a lot about digital marketing, digital advertising, so that kind of plugged that part that had been kind of missing.
So Weber Shandwick is, you're coming in as what in the Weber Shandwick empire here in Japan?
Right.
What was your position?
Great. So when I first joined Weber Shandwick, this was almost 8 years ago, and Weber Shandwick has been in Japan, you may or may not know, since 1959, as the predecessor was before the IPG multinational conglomerate took it over. So it's been very based in media relations and government relations, a very traditional, strong agency. However, Weber Shandwick elsewhere in the world was moving very much into the digital sphere. Whether or not it was helping with owned media, you familiar with the
maybe some people won't understand owned media.
Sure.
So what does that mean?
So we have paid media is advertising, where you buy the space to say whatever you want. Owned media are the channels and the platforms that you own. So, and it's usually a website. It's the company's website, but it could be their newsletters. It could be events that they run. So that's the owned media. And then the third part is earned media. And that's where your story is so compelling that media journalists will pick it up, or influencers will retweet it. And so actually there's a subcategory which is shared. So it's paid, owned, earned, and shared.
So are you coming in as the MD at that stage?
No, I was coming in
as
the I was originally hired to be managing editor for this content marketing division that was being set up.
Right.
And so I was going to be the managing editor. There was a business chief and a digital chief.
So I can imagine, this is all very new. So even though you're coming in from outside, you've already been doing this.
Yes.
And so you come in with the knowledge, you come in with the credibility and the experience, which must have been a big help when you're coming into a brand new company, new team. Hi, I'm Campbell, I'm your boss,
Yes.
who are you, So I guess that made it a little bit easier to come in at that level then.
It did. And the other thing that I would say, and this has happened more than once in my career, is that I had a knowledge that others didn't, and they knew that they needed to have it. And this was a wonderful time where people were really starting to get fascinated about how to do PR and communicate digitally and or augment what they were doing through other channels. So to come in and say, well, listen, I actually know how to do this, and I've been doing it in different ways. I've been on both sides of the media fence. I've been actually producing the content as well as producing the advertising, and I understood how a lot of the technology worked. So coming in, but my team, when I first joined, was very small. There was maybe 3 people, 2 video producers and 1 content producer. And I was charged to really hire and build the team so I had to find out what our colleagues here needed, what their clients needed, and then kind of hire against that. And so very quickly kind of hired up. At one point I missed out on. I wanted to start saying that there was meant to be a team of 3 running it, growing it. The business person joined and went straight to Weber Shandwick proper, as in not the digital unit. The digital person never came, so I ended up doing all 3 jobs. Which was really great. It was really good. So I had to think about the business for the one of the first times I was really looking at a P&L, and I had to really crank up my digital understanding of the platforms that we were working on and also the tools that we had. So that was great. It was a very intense 3 months here. And then from there, I moved very quickly into the main part of the business, where I was working very closely with all the different practices and try to, rather than have digital as a separate unit, try to embed it in everything everybody was doing. And I found some people were very receptive to it, and others were like, "Oh, yeah, but that's not for us." Yeah.
So I was just thinking about that. Yeah, you're trying to integrate, but you don't actually have control over those divisions or sections. That's quite difficult, actually. So how did you go about integrating in that situation?
It's a great question, and I was just thinking about it recently. So first of all, I found allies, people who liked what we had to offer, and it was a big company by PR company standards in Japan back then. So if everybody wanted what we had to offer, we couldn't have provided it fast enough anyway. So I just kind of went with the people who were open to it. And then they took me to meet their clients, and then together we kind of developed either solutions or we were proposing things. And then I also looked around the global network. What were we doing for either the same clients elsewhere or similar clients in other markets in the digital space? And just coming back and saying, oh, well, we're doing this and we're doing that. Sometimes I would be saying it to my colleagues. Sometimes they would let me present it to their their own clients, and we didn't know that we were doing this elsewhere, and can we do that in Japan? And yes, we can. And then little by little, obviously the world was moving so quickly into that space. It was actually hard to keep up.
Did you run into that wall sometimes you get here of, well, look, Campbell, that might be working overseas, but this is Japan. It's different here. Yes, we may be running that digital program in Europe, but yeah, that's not going to fly here. Did you run into that sort of problem?
Yeah, very often. Even today, we still do. Yes, and it's valid. It really is valid. I've seen very frustrated clients in other parts of APAC trying to push their campaigns that have worked in all these different countries, and they say, well, it's going to work in Japan, and so they try to push it as it is, and it doesn't work. And one of the reasons it doesn't work is they don't get buy-in from their counterparts in Japan, which is the first thing you need to do. But my general approach to that is, let's look at the spirit of what they're trying to achieve, and then we can think about how best to localize that in Japan.
The delivery angle might change, but the
Exactly
basic
right.
messaging may be universal. Yeah.
That's exactly
So,
right, yeah.
what point do you become, in charge of the whole shop here and have 80 people reporting to you? When did that sort of happen?
Right. So that it kind of happened in phases. So we had a Japanese managing director, and he was very, I'd like to say, progressive in the way that he was really interested in, what I had to offer, and the fact that I was kind of, for him, from his perspective anyway, I was coming from outside of the industry, as from the media, and then from advertising. And so he was very interested in learning more. So I spent a lot of time with him talking about, what we can offer and how our clients can benefit from getting into digital communications. And at the same time, I was actually learning a lot from him as he was talking about the main principles of PR and communications from a traditional point of view. And then at one point, we realized that we had to make a big jump because we were still so traditional, and sometimes our clients were actually getting moved out from the traditional clients to the more digital progressive clients, and we weren't keeping up. So a decision was made actually at the regional level to exchange the Japanese MD for a non-Japanese MD, a guy who'd been very successful in the network, growing actually Weber Shandwick Korea from zero to a big successful office in about 10 years, and who happens to be the CEO of APAC right now. So they made him the dual MD for Japan and Korea. And almost from the moment he joined, it was, okay, well, I'm not going to be here forever. We need a succession plan. And so he really did start grooming me for that role.
Right. So when you actually got the role,
Yes.
it's always difficult when you've been a colleague and now you're the boss. What was challenging about making that transition?
It is a really good point, and I'm sure that everybody deals with it differently. I felt, and I still do feel, that if it hadn't been me and it had been someone else, one of my colleagues, that I would have been 100% supportive. And so because I have that attitude, we're looking at the goal together. This is what we want to do. Whether I do it or you do it, who's best to do it at this time. I actually let the job kind of dictate it, and I just followed what needed to happen. And I think that was the message I kind of gave to some of my senior colleagues who have been in the company for a long time, is that, for this particular role, at this particular time, I think that I have the skill set that is appropriate, and they seem to agree. So
often, though, it happens when people are passed, in their minds, passed over for that succession, they start to look outside the company. They say, well, look, I didn't get a shot here, and Campbell looks pretty young to me, so that guy could be in this job for a long time. If I want to get my shot, I'm going to have to get that somewhere else, and they leave. So you often lose some very talented, experienced people in the process. Has that been an issue or not an issue?
Luckily, and knock on wood, it hasn't. But I will say that, in fact, our turnover in the last couple of years has been the lowest it has been for a long time.
Is that simply because COVID's whacked the hell out of the economy and a lot of people on the street looking for jobs? Is that a function of that or something else?
Interesting. So it's there's a real talent war going on, and I know that you've spoken to some of the heads of other PR agencies, and I'm not sure if that topic did come up, but it really is very, very competitive. So we've been, but I'll talk a little bit more about how I've tried to work to stop that turnover and keep the employees engaged. But I haven't had that issue with people.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. Well, let's talk about engagement because, we started teaching engagement about 5 years ago. We had a lot of programs on engagement, and it didn't really get going much in Japan at that time. We were probably too early to the market with it, actually. But now it's sort of made a resurrection. It's quite a topic again. So what have you found over the course of your career in working in Japan with Japanese teams and international teams that works well in getting people engaged about their work?
Right. So it's funny you're talking about the resurgence of engagement. I think maybe people are using that buzzword, but engaging people, and I know you're very good at this, but engaging people, in the truest sense of the word, that's been around forever. And if you feel engaged in anything, then you're much more likely to participate very mindfully and not separate on a whim or if things go bad. So that has been my kind of modus operandi, is to really not try to say, okay, today I'm going to engage somebody. And here's a plan to be an engager. I think it comes from within and being genuinely very interested in people, looking for the best in what everybody has to offer, not focusing too much on where they're not performing as well as you might like, but really, first of all, to have that real human interest.
Just on that,
Sure.
I'm sure you've got a pure intention, but sometimes people on the receiving end may have experienced people with not such a pure intention in the past who they get that sort of feeling that, the boss is trying to suss me out, work me out so the boss can wring more out of me, And this is not about me; it's all about them. And I'm just one of the slaves here on the galley ship on the oars. And so there's always a little bit of hesitancy, perhaps, about opening up too much to the boss. So I don't know if that's been an issue or not, or if it has been an issue. How have you gotten around that to make sure that people understand this is an authentic thing? It's not a manipulative, I've got a huge agenda here and your part in it is pretty big in terms of the numbers you're going to produce, for me.
Yes.
To go beyond that.
Yes, it's true. And listen, I'm talking obviously from my perspective. It might be very different if you did actually ask, some of the employees and people that I've worked with. But I feel that it's consistency. That's one thing that I don't think that I've changed very much from the first day I walked in the office over the 8 years, and trying to and also being the same with everybody fairly. So because that they're going to be talking to each other and say, oh, he said this to me, he said that to me. So it's I think it's the consistency. It's also doing it over a long extended period of time, and I also think that people sense authenticity, that they, even if they think, well, hang on, are you, is this a play? Is it, where's the catch? And I think that I've kind of demonstrated that there isn't a catch, and I, for good or for bad, I will, if I'm also very authentic in giving negative feedback as well going forward.
Well, just on that, how do you give negative feedback? What have you found works in terms of giving? Because it's quite a tricky thing to give people negative feedback. What have you found works well in that regard?
Again, I think we go back to the North Star, what we're trying to achieve together. I focus a lot on what people are good at and, where they've made these great advances or great contributions to the company or to the team. And then, from that point, and I try to be very clear about, what my expectations are. And so, and I actually say this about performance reviews as well. If you're only doing them once a year and then suddenly you explode and you say, oh, you didn't do all these things that I expected you or we talked about last year. It's very important to, stay as close as possible, give, regular updates, and let people know from time to time that, I'm not happy with this or this is not what we agreed on. And so that there shouldn't be any surprises, when we get to the performance reviews. So I think it's that staying close and staying constant. I can do that at the size of the company right now. I wonder how that will change as the company grows, which it is. But that's that regular, consistent, long-term feedback, I think.
So in terms of practical terms, you've talked about authenticity, being transparent with people, treating people fairly, being consistent, all of those things in terms of getting people engaged. Have you found anything else that works? I don't know, do you jump out of trees together and do outdoor stuff or, go bowling together or karaoke together? I mean, these days you probably don't do any of that because of COVID,
right.
But, are there any sort of things that you've found that work well in that sense in Japan?
For sure. So one of the things that I started since last year actually is that I tried to have either lunch or breakfast once a week with somebody in the office. And that's from back office to front office. And there's not really an agenda except to just check in how people are doing. And then we sit down and it's either somewhere near the office or somewhere near their home or just something that's convenient. And I think that it's good. People seem to like it, and I think that's why people are staying. It can also be a time where people will tell me things that I had no idea that was going on. So every time I go into one of those meetings, it's a little bit scary, but also incredibly enjoyable. It's kind of one of the highlights.
And people open up to you because, my experience in Japan, when things are not going well, for good or bad, often the boss is the last one to find out. And I always say to people, look, I have the money, I have the authority, I have the power, I can fix things if I know and I have enough time. If I get too close to a deadline or something, I just can't apply the powers I've got to help you. So if you're hiding it from me, you're actually making it harder on yourself. Better to tell me early and I'll help you to fix it. But often people don't think like that. They think, well, the boss doesn't know, boss doesn't need to know. And then you find out when they can't avoid it, right? But you're usually too late. So how do you encourage people to have that confidence to come up early and tell you, well, actually, this is what's happened?
Right.
As opposed to finding out at the last moment when it's too late to do anything about it.
Right. So I don't wait for them to come up to tell me. I'll be the one. I'll be the one asking. Try to just keep that door open and speaking to their bosses, speaking to their colleagues, how are things going, and saying that there are definitely times when I haven't. I've missed something, or I've sat down with somebody and say, "Well, how are you going?" And they're, "Oh, good, wonderful." And then, a couple of days later, I find out they're not good at all. I've had a very intense conversation with a colleague who was having a problem with a client, and I got the whole story, and I thought, okay, well, I think I know how to fix this, and he doesn't seem to be too stressed by it all. But that evening, he sent me a very long, really upset email that he couldn't tell me face to face. So that was a learning for me there, that sometimes that there is a gap where even if I like to think that I'm Mr. Approachable, that sometimes it's difficult for people to talk about.
Everything's relative.
Everything's relative.
Yeah, relatively approachable for most people.
That's right.
And what about innovation? Because if you're actually able to engage people, then they care about the business. If they care about the business, it's like, the build a better mousetrap idea, If you care, then you want to build a better mousetrap. You want to build a better Weber Shandwick. You want to build a better client relationship, whatever it might be. So there's some creative, innovative, opportunity in there. What have you found has worked well to help people to become more creative and innovative in their work?
Sure. So we're very lucky to be part of a network and a company that really is at the cutting edge of our industry, and there's a few big names around the world, and we kind of all look at each other to see who's going to do the next big thing, and we kind of learn from each other. But we really are one of the companies that is really making the huge changes to the industry, and even redefining what a public relations agency is. So I try to really tap into that. And bring as much of that information into Japan and share it with as many people as possible. But honestly, with the like-minded people who are interested in this. And so every month I do a town hall, and I'll showcase this is something else that we're doing. Of course, we talk about awards being won, but it's also good to talk about how we've won that. We have identified some of the experts around the network in different areas, whether or not it's sustainability or DEI, and I've actually made some kind of mentorship where I've found somebody in Japan that I think would be really good at that. So I've connected them with somebody in Minnesota. I've connected them with somebody in Sweden. And so they are actually learning about some of the most cutting edge innovations in the industry, and they become the go-to person in Japan. So that's one way of doing it. The other is, and this is very, very simple, but we have a suggestion box. But the suggestion box is digital, and it's anonymous, and I've just opened it up, and every month I encourage people to submit things in there in Japanese or in English. And I honestly speaking, I was expecting a few nasty emails or people just saying, "Oh, I hate the way that Campbell doesn't wear a tie in interviews," or something like that. I don't know, but all the suggestions and the questions have been so constructive and really well thought of, and people knowing, in my previous company, we used to use this tool, or we did this, or would there be a way of combining these two things together to make a new product? So that has been really fantastic.
Interesting. When I worked for Shinsei Bank, because banking is highly regulated, and we wanted to create something similar to that, we actually had to get an external third party to host it so people could input information onto this third party site, and we could take out information from the third party site, but we could never connect who was putting the information in. And we had to do that to give people a true sense of this is really anonymous, and you can say whatever you like, scandalous or collaborative or whatever you like. And it was very, very powerful in terms of people could really express what they wanted to say. So how did you, just mechanically, how did you get it to work here? Because often people, when you do things like engagement surveys, staff satisfaction surveys, in Japan, people are often like, is this really anonymous? Aren't they really identifying who said what? And, I'm cautious about what I'll say because I'm not really sure this is going to be anonymous. So you don't really get the flavour that you want. How are you able to make that such that people felt very safe to put their comments in there?
Right. So I think there's two elements to it. One is that the technology that we use, I think everybody's quite familiar with it. And just looking at the URL, and they've got the level of digital literacy across the office here that they know that, unless they've got a very sophisticated kind of cookie tracking technique, it would be and in fact, I don't think it would be possible. So the technology we're using, it's very clear to the users that this is, it's going to be anonymous.
So is this an app or a third-party site?
Third-party site, yes.
Third-party site, right? So you pay someone to host that site for you as a repository for the feedback?
That's right.
Okay,
that's exactly right.
Interesting.
Yes.
Good idea.
And that's one side of it. The other side is, I hope that I've created the culture or an atmosphere that even if we did know it was that person that said it, that they wouldn't feel certainly they would not feel any kind of recrimination, but they'd also be comfortable enough to say it. So yeah, that was me. Some people actually put their name at the end of it, which is really interesting, and it only comes to me, and then I choose who it gets shared with, and so that's I think those two things, people's digital literacy to know, this would be very hard to trace back, as well as the fact that, even if we did trace it back, if anything, they're probably going to be congratulated for giving such frank, constructive feedback.
So, we have nowadays this term psychological safety in the work environment, which is a relatively new term. I mean, the concept's probably been there forever, but it's now given some precedent and some attention. So that whole thing around trust, culture that you talked about, what have you found worked well for you to create an environment where people are able to put their name to the feedback they're giving and know they can give that feedback without any sort of retribution and actually be thanked for the frankness of their feedback? How did you create an atmosphere here where people felt like that?
Okay, probably the answer is very simple, is that I thank them for that, for that really negative feedback or constructive feedback. The other thing too is like being in meetings, if somebody does get very passionate and critical about one point or another, I'm very, very careful to make sure that the conversation is framed in a constructive way. It's not a personal attack, and if it ever slips into that area, I will step in. And if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. It's what you're saying might be valid, but the way you're saying it is inappropriate.
Right. And now, that conversation, we're in a meeting. Is that conversation going on during the meeting, or is that conversation taking place privately after the meeting?
Great. Both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah. So when I say both, it's there are two ways of doing it. I would sometimes, if embarrass certainly the person who's kind of the subject of the criticism. I would be very careful about that. When I say me stepping in would it embarrass them, I'll be careful about doing that. And sometimes the person who's actually giving the criticism doesn't warrant a public shaming. However, if it's it's a good question. It's actually a question that I do deal with from time to time, especially in cases of people making inappropriate comments about age or religion or sex, which is very, very rare. I'm happy to say in this office, but if anybody does kind of step into that area, that's the time where you say, oh, okay, should I jump in now, or should we just get over this and have a word later? And I have done that from time to time. And again, much to the credit of my colleagues, that people are usually very receptive to that. Oh, thank God, I didn't even notice that. Or
right.
And sometimes it's framed in, we're an international company now, so that kind of comment or joke is not appropriate. It's like yes. And often they will actually reach out to their colleagues and say, sorry, I didn't mean that. And
right.
then I hear back from the person, and said, that was they got back to me. So we try to make an environment, a culture where it's absolutely zero tolerance.
And if you're going to give some advice to someone who is being sent to Japan to run an operation here, what would be some advice you'd give them? What should they be thinking about before they get here, or when they get here?
Right. Well, so I often have the experience where I'm working with clients who have just moved to Japan, and part of our remit is to tell them about the landscape. It's usually the media landscape, but sometimes it's more about the business landscape, the do's and the don'ts of speaking in public, and that often extends into how to communicate with your employees, because part of our job, a growing part of our business is actually internal communications, with some of the most important stakeholders. So I kind of have these 3 rules of thumb that I like to say, and it might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but I tell them to trust their instincts. Often when they're coming into Japan for the first time, they've heard about all these rules and gift giving, and the nicest people, executives that I talk to, are the ones that don't want to offend anybody. This word comes up quite often. Oh, I don't want to be offensive. And to that, because of that, they're thinking about that too much. They don't trust their own instincts about no, actually this person is not good, or this business plan is not good, because they're not sure of everything. So I say, trust your instincts first of all. Then secondly, I encourage them to trust their employees, because I think that people coming from other markets are amazed or incredulous that people can be so dedicated, and that there isn't a hidden agenda to the amount that they work and everything they're trying to achieve, and that you can actually really trust people to do the right thing. And then the third point is to have a really good counsel, almost, if you will, like a conscience, someone who can be a conscience on your shoulder that can actually tell you the difference between, when those first 2 points are wrong. So when your instincts are wrong, and when there's somebody that you shouldn't trust. So if you've got those 3 elements in place, I think.
Do you have a counsel like that?
So
yourself?
So I do. I have many counsels, but also, as we said at the beginning, my entire career has been in Japan.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yeah.
I would struggle. I think I would actually need that kind of counsel if I was to work outside of Japan.
Right. Yeah. Any other advice for them?
No, I think that there's one word that I often say to, and if we're talking about, I know this is a leadership podcast, but it's to be successful in Japan, I think you have to be patient. You really do have to be patient. And some people come in, I think, with very high KPIs and, have these great turnaround stories where they can come in and just, chop, chop, chop. And suddenly Japan was really suffering, but now it's going back. And if they're really focused on that, there's a high probability that they're going to fail. So I think that people need to be patient, and you have to have these many meetings. This is maybe I'm too Japanese. I've been here for such a long time, but I think that having patience gets you to see the lay of the land, and also to work out who you really can and can't trust, and then these great partners that you form and partnerships that you form will last for decades. So patience.
Patience, always good in Japan. So Campbell, is there anything about leading in Japan that I haven't asked you about yet, which we should have covered?
Yeah, I think there are two very big differences in whether or not you're leading a Japanese company or you're leading a foreign company. Now, I'm not sure how many of your listeners and viewers will actually be ever leading a Japanese company, because I know that they're very few and far between. But when you are leading a foreign company in Japan, you usually attract a certain kind of talent. So I think that's something to be very conscious of as well, that either people are very bilingual and they're really looking to work in a foreign company for all the freedoms and opportunities that presents. But you also have to. This is one thing that I think that's very important. Is sometimes that you will have employees that are working in these foreign companies whose English skills or the international communication skills are not as good as their colleagues, but their performance is really great. So you've got to think, you've got to think very carefully about how to reward them and evaluate them in a way that's commensurate with somebody else who just happens to be a better communicator and can tell you on a daily basis, I've done this, I've done that, I'm going to do this. So I think that's a very important skill to have, is to really listen to both the quiet people and the people who maybe don't communicate in your native language.
What about your definition of leadership?
I always like to compare it with the definition of management, which is managing people is more or less telling them what to do and kind of structure them in a way that benefits the company. Whereas leadership, I think it's really it's walking the talk. I try to live and work the values that I espouse, and I think that's the difference between a good manager and a good leader.
Okay, very good. Well,
thank you.
Campbell, thank you very much.
It's been great.
So join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.